Welcome to Daily Living with Father Chapin, where we consider God's Word and how we might be able to apply it into our daily living. Yes, my friend, that is what we do. Sometimes the Bible can be a bit confusing, so we bust it down like a fraction. We're asking questions. Questions like, what do these Gospels have to do with me? That's what I want to know. How can I take these Gospels and apply them into my daily living so that I can become a reflection of God's love to a world that obviously don't know God for sure and definitely is in deep need of more love? I mean, take a look around. There's a lot of bad news bears out there. How can I take the good news of Jesus Christ and apply it into my daily living so that I can become light in this present darkness? I want to be a tool in the hand of God, making present His kingdom, not someday, but today and every day, and that is what this show is all about. And I'm so glad you could join us today. Oh, we got a good one. We are hearing from the Gospel of Matthew. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star at its rising, and have come to do him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was greatly troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For thus it has been written through the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, since from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly, and ascertained from them the time of the star's appearance. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word, that I too may go and do him homage." After their audience with the king, they set out. And behold, the star that they had seen at its rising preceded them, until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. They were overjoyed at seeing the star. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother. They prostrated themselves and did him homage. Then they opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. Wow, the gospel of the Lord. This is Daily Living on Father Chapin. You hang out. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk about this gospel and a few other things here as we consider God's Word and how we might be able to apply it into our daily living. Hi, this is Father Chapin, host of Daily Living with Father Chapin. It is such a pleasure to be able to come into your home each and every week and share the good news, but it's a bit expensive. So I would ask you to consider grabbing a piece of paper and a pencil, and at the next break, I'm going to share with you some details how you can become a partner with Daily Living. What do you say we get back to the show? Welcome back to Daily Living. So today we revisit, as we do every year at this time, the three wise men, also known as the Magi. Tradition names them Melchior, Balthasar, and Gaspar. And every year, as we set up our nativity scenes, if it's allowed, these mysterious figures will appear, kind of hanging out in the background. Like I said, they're a bit mysterious because they don't look like anybody else. They don't dress like anybody else. And they come with this strange animal we call a camel. But they have presents, which, of course, as a child, certainly got my attention. So who are these mysterious people we call Magi? And why do we tell this story every year at this time? And even more to the point, how do they apply into our daily living? Well, my friends, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. You know, the other day I was visiting somebody, and they had a small nativity scene under their tree. But obviously the kids had gotten into it because, well, somebody put a wise man right next to Jesus. And I couldn't help but think, well, that's wrong. that's Mary's spot. What's that guy doing there? But then I caught myself and I thought, well, how would I know? I wasn't there. How would I know who was standing where? In fact, how would anybody know exactly who was there and who was standing where? And as long as we're talking about this, did you know that there's scriptural evidence that would suggest that our gospel today, the visit of these magi, didn't happen until 2 or 3 years after Jesus was born? Did you notice that the gospel says they were overjoyed at seeing the star, and upon entering the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary? Okay, the house, not a manger. But of course, why let the facts ruin a good story? And the fact of the matter is, through the years, we have conflated these stories and put the magi in the manger. Why? Because this is what we do. We call it tradition. Tradition is folklore that is passed down from one generation to the next generation, also known as myth. Now, myth is defined as a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining the supernatural. Other words that come to mind are words like folk tale, legend, fable. But there's a second definition of myth, and here's where we get into trouble, because the other definition of myth is a widely held but false belief or idea, leading many to think that myth is something that's not true, and that's not the case. Myth is definitely true. Myth is a story that conveys a higher truth. Now, when it comes to the supernatural, you just can't really pin it down with a solid definition because it's outside of the experience of our natural world. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that it's hard to put it into the box of our definition. So all we can really do is point to it, and we do so using such things as allegory or hyperbole or myth. These are literary devices that are employed to communicate a higher truth. Consider the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis, the fall of man. What is that story trying to communicate? Well, that sin came into the world, right? But when you read the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, it features a talking snake. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen a snake talk. Can snakes really talk? Well, that's not the question. The question is not, can snakes talk? The question is sin in this world? And I don't think you got to look too far to see that that is certainly the case. Myth serves a very important function because it is conveying a truth from one generation to the next. Now, if you apply this idea of myth to Christmas and the birth of Jesus, well, Lord have mercy, it's almost overwhelming. You got Santa Claus, you got mistletoe, you got reindeer, you got elves, you got 50% off at the mall, you got the manger scene, you got the 3 wise men, but hold on there, Sparky. It might be tempting to lump the 3 wise men into this idea of myth, but there's ample historical evidence to support the existence of magi. And while, like I said, they probably weren't in the manger scene per se, that doesn't mean that they don't exist, because they certainly did. So let's talk about this. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews?" Now, first thing I want to point out is, did you notice that it does not specifically number these magi as 3? It simply says magi from the east. Now, of course, tradition puts a number at 3, most likely corresponding with the 3 gifts that they're bringing, but it could have been 50 for all we know. But once again, who are these men, these magi? Historical records tell us that the magi were a hereditary priesthood of the Medes in Persia. And most of the information that we have on Magi does not come from the Bible, but rather historical writings. But there is one notable exception, and that is in the book of Daniel, which, by the way, is a book in the Old Testament. And if you read that chapter, as you should, you'll read a story about the king of Babylon. His name was King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this king, Nebuchadnezzar, has a dream, which was really more of a nightmare. And of course, in the ancient world, dreams were taken much more seriously than they are today. And the king wakes up and he's very disturbed about this dream. So he calls in his peeps, the priests, the sorcerers, the magi, this priestly sect that are running the country, kind of like his cabinet. And he says, I want you to interpret this dream. And they say, okay, well, king, tell us about the dream. And he says, no, I'm not going to tell you about the dream, because if you are who you say you are, I don't need to tell you. You would know. And by the way, if you don't know and you can't interpret my dream, then I will know that you are a fraud, and I will have you and your families killed. So this was not a good day for the Magi. So they went to find this man Daniel, who was a Jewish prisoner of war. Remember now, Babylonia had captured Israel and had taken many of the Jewish captives back into slavery. And Daniel was one of them. And word was out that this man Daniel could in fact interpret dreams. So they brought him before the king. Now, they didn't really think he could do it. They were bringing him like a lamb to slaughter. But much to their surprise, not only does Daniel know exactly what the dream was, he tells King Nebuchadnezzar exactly what it means. Well, the king was so pleased that he immediately makes Daniel head priest, head magi, or the Rab Mag, which of course does not please the other magi, and they devise a plan to have Daniel killed. And they came up with this law that you had to worship King Nebuchadnezzar or you would suffer death. Knowing that Daniel worshiped the one and true God Yahweh, he would refuse, and when he would be condemned to death. So he's thrown into the lion's den, and as the story goes, Daniel walks out of that den unharmed, and those same priests that had plotted to kill him were thrown instead into the den and immediately devoured, because what goes around comes around. So here we have Daniel, and he's now Rab Mag. He's chief of the Magi, which means that he is the chief administrator of both Babylonia and the Persian Empire, which, can you imagine, that's huge. So as Rab Mag, as chief magi or magi, that word comes from the word magus, which is where we get the word magistrate, because they're not only authorities on all religious matters, they would also mediate civil and political disputes. So they're highly learned in the areas of law, mathematics, politics, religion. They certainly would have been well versed in all the world's religions at the time, of which Judaism was a primary religion. But they were pagans. They weren't Jewish. They were pagans. But all of a sudden now you have this Jewish captive that's running the show. So it was an odd situation. But the funny thing is that even though the Jews and the Persians were very different people, they suffered a remarkably similar fate. Both nations would later fall to Alexander the Great, only to later regain their independence, and then came the rise of Rome, when General Pompey, of volcano fame, conquered Jerusalem and installed the puppet king Herod. Later on, Rome attacks Israel's neighbor, Parthia, which, as we said, is run by the Persians. So the Parthians mount a counterattack to Rome as they attacked their neighbor Israel, which was controlled by Rome. Now, I know we're getting a bit into the weeds here, but stay with me. This is important. This is Daily Living. I'm Father Chapin. You hang out. We'll be right back, and we will continue to talk about this amazing gospel that comes to us here as we consider God's Word and how we might be able to apply it into our daily living. Hi, this is Father Chapin, host of Daily Living. If you feel like you're being fed by this ministry, I would ask you to prayerfully consider a partnership with Daily Living and what we're trying to do here. A monthly gift of any amount that you feel comfortable with, and I will send you a monthly newsletter, and if you provide an email address, a script of the show prior to its broadcast. Just write a check to Daily Living, P.O. Box 339, Nitro, West Virginia 25143. You can also go on the website at mydailyliving.com and give through PayPal, and together we can shine the light of the good news in a whole lot of dark places. What do you say we get back to the show? Welcome back to Daily Living. Now, just for the break, we were talking about Parthia, and they were mounting a counterattack against Rome. This caused King Herod to flee, and the Parthians take control. And then they gave Israel back their country. Now, King Herod is now in exile in Rome, and he pleads and bribes Caesar Augustus to retake Israel, and he agrees. And after 3 years of fighting, finally Rome conquers these pesky Israelites and return Herod to power. So, when behold, Magi from the east, which we can assume is Parthia, show up asking, where's the newborn king of the Jews? Can you see how this would be a big problem for Herod? Which is why we read, when King Herod heard this, he was deeply troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Well, I bet he was. Couple of things here. First of all, when these Magi show up, they're very important people. I seriously doubt they would be traveling, in hostile territory, just them alone. I'm sure they would have had a large escort with many soldiers in a caravan, which would explain why the Roman garrison, which is stationed in the city walls, would not have attacked it. But that's not all. Where is the newborn king of the Jews? Can you imagine King Herod in this situation? What? What are you talking about? I'm the king of the Jews. There's only room for one king around here. Now keep in mind who we're dealing with. Herod was a psychopathic killer who had both his wife, who he loved at the time still. She was killed along with his sons because they threatened his power. So he certainly would not have taken too kindly to even the suggestion of another king. We saw his star at its rising, and we have come to do him homage. Now, tradition and mythology tells us that the Magi were following a star, which would be hard to do. Remember, the telescope has not been invented yet. But another thing, stars, they don't move. They might look like they're moving, but it's the world that's moving. Stars don't move. But you know what does move? Planets. Planets move. In fact, there is an actual term for this. When a planet comes up in the sky, there's a point where it will stop just before it begins to descend, and they call it its rising. And you know what's even more amazing? Modern day astronomy can map out the night sky and work backwards through computers and tell you exactly what the night sky would have looked like at this time. And guess what? If you were in the east of Jerusalem, let's say, for example, Persia, at this time, and you looked out at the morning sky, you would have seen the planet Jupiter at its rising, just above Jerusalem. And not only that, but in the ancient world, the planet Jupiter was known as the king of the stars. And not only that, but if you were in Jerusalem at this time and waited for the morning sky, you would have seen, once again, Jupiter, the king of the stars, at its rising above where? Wait for it, Bethlehem. Now we're just talking here, but I think it's fairly safe to assume that Daniel, as Rab Mag, would have taught his fellow Magi about the Hebrew Scriptures and how this king would arrive and how they must watch for his arrival in the morning sky. So these guys show up. We saw the star at its rising. We have come to do him homage. But it's a very curious situation. Because remember, they're pagans. They're not Jewish. Yet they seem to know the Hebrew Bible better than anybody else in Jerusalem. We saw the star at its rising. I can only imagine that as they were making their way to the holy city of Jerusalem, they were expecting that when they arrived, it'd like be a big party. It'd be like Mardi Gras. But imagine their surprise when they finally get there, and well, it's just business as usual. Just another ho-hum day in the big city. Star? What star? Now watch this. These pagan foreigners travel at a great distance, at great peril, to follow a star that nobody in Jerusalem even seemed to notice. And you want to know why? Because nobody took the time to look up. It had been over 400 years since the last prophet spoke to Israel, and the whole idea of the coming of a Messiah had been lost in a haze of tradition, folklore, and myth, and nobody was watching. Does this sound oddly familiar to anybody? So Herod calls in his peeps, and he asks him, hey, where's this Christ to be born? And they refer him to the prophet Micah and say Bethlehem, which is precisely where Jupiter, the king of the stars, was seen at its rising. But what happens next? It's just weird. I mean, this is weird. I don't understand it. To me, this tells me that Herod did not take this very seriously for two reasons. Number one, obviously he's not a very religious man. But number two, he just sends them off into the night alone. Says, when you find the child, let me know so I can pay my respects. Not even a small escort to keep an eye on them. Do you know how easy it would have been for him to assign a group of soldiers to keep a watch over these guys? But he doesn't. Just sends them off into the night, and there they go, to the small community called Bethlehem. It's about 6 miles outside of Jerusalem. So they find the child. They prostrated themselves, and they do him homage, and then they open up their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I mean, can you imagine Joseph about now? I mean, imagine what he's been through. Mary came to him with this fantastic story, which he obviously did not believe until Gabriel appeared to him in a dream. Then later he finds himself in his own hometown for the census. All his relatives have turned their back on him. The child is born in an animal stall. Then, of course, there was last week with all the things that Simeon said at his presentation. I cannot help but think that through it all, Joseph was plagued with doubt. Now all of a sudden you got these three strange men, or maybe not three, but these magi coming from the east, and they're doing the child homage, and they're bringing these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now tradition tells us that the gold represents kingship, the frankincense represents priesthood, and the myrrh represents the perfume used to anoint the dead. But not for Joseph. You know what it represented for Joseph? Money. Money that he would soon need as he flees to Egypt. Because God takes care of his people. So the story continues. After having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country another way. The double secret back way, which is no small detail. I mean, defying the orders of the king in his own land, that's the kind of thing that can get you killed. But then again, sometimes following God's will can be a bit dangerous. So, we know that soon after this, Joseph will be warned in another dream to flee to Egypt because Herod becomes enraged when he finds that he's been double-crossed by the Magi. And he orders the slaughter of the innocents. A gruesome horror story which unfortunately continues to play out in this country every day. So, wow, what a story. What do we do with this story? What is the deeper meaning of the story? And how can we apply this into our daily living? Well, may I suggest there's a lot of deeper meanings here, okay? But I want to focus on the biggest lesson. And that's this. When these Magi arrived in the city of Jerusalem, like I said, it was just another day in the big city. They were spiritually asleep, and as a result, they completely missed it. Much like Lazarus lying in the grave, they had wrapped themselves in the burial bands of their habitual sin, and they snoozed in spiritual slumber. What about you? What about me? The difference between the Magi and the people of Jerusalem is very simple. The Magi were watching. The Magi were awake. What about you? Are you awake today? My friends, today we have the Magi traveling at a great distance, following a star. And when they arrived at the holy city, nobody even noticed. What about you? What about me? If Jesus showed up in the middle of our lives today, would we even notice? Or are we so caught up in this material world that we wouldn't? Have we lost Jesus in the haze of tradition, folklore, and myth? Jesus is sending you a star today. Are you taking the time to look up? You know, every day in this country, somebody does something nice for somebody else. Today, why don't you let that somebody be you? Because the best vitamin for a Christian is B1. This is Daily Living. I'm Father Chapin. Hope you can come back next week and we'll do it again. Until then, I hope you let God live in your life. And I bless you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit.